So you see these little paradoxes going on all the time in the Back to the Future films.
Yeah.
The first movie is essentially, again, this retelling of this solar monomythic allegory where clearly Marty is a, Horus, Egyptian type figure. Doc Brown is obviously the wizard character. This is what you would call the Hermes Trismegistus archetype, the god of magic. This is, of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, Dumbledore in Harry Potter, and this would be Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. That would be their counterparts. You clearly have a heavy Egyptian mythology with this revolving around the sun, where the time machine is what you would call the solar chariot. If you remember, it can't be activated to the 88 miles an hour.
Yeah.
This is a trope that you will see routinely in time travel movies, is the number 8.
A Kodega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with a Kodega and sharing one of yours. Click that like. Yeah! If you're new here, subscribe and have the bell hit for notifications to stay up to date on all of the new content. Hey everyone, Rye here with Kodega's Codex of Curiosities. Sorry, I got to adjust my screen there. So welcome to another episode, another curiosity, and this one here is going to be very, very interesting. Something I talk about a lot is I usually call it soft disclosure within the movies. There's truths in plain sight. They're giving us tidbits, breadcrumbs, and to upcoming events. It's usually before something big happens. We're given soft disclosure through Hollywood. And for those who don't know, Hollywood is a type of wood that was used in manufacturing magical wands. So there's a little tidbit of information as well. So when someone says they're talking about Hollywood, well, maybe it's because they're casting spells. Something. There's always something there. Okay. So let me see here. I'm just going to ask everybody, I want to say thanks everyone for watching. If you haven't subscribed, hit that bell for notifications. If you're listening on Spotify, I have a lot more content that goes out on YouTube and on Rumble now too. So come check us out. Either or works for me. Without further ado, I'm going to bring Robert Sullivan to the show. Hello there, Robert. How you doing?
Oh, I'm very well. Thank you, Rye, for having me on Codex of Curiosities. It's my pleasure to be here tonight.
I'm really looking forward to this. You were recommended to me by a friend, and I looked into your bio and I said, wow, this is something that I find fascinating and interesting, and I really am looking forward to hearing you talk about it. Hearing you talk about as I sometimes say, truth in plain sight. It's there. We're being fed these breadcrumbs always, and by whom is always the bigger, one of the bigger questions, and perhaps why as well. So Robert, why don't you introduce yourself to my listeners and viewers and tell us a little bit about yourself and where they can find you?
Sure. Thank you again for that introduction. My name is Robert Sullivan. I'm an attorney. I'm a writer. I'm an author. My website is my name. My full name is Robert W. Sullivan IV. So my website is www.robertwsullivan, and it's the number 4.com. I recently had to change it a couple months ago due to a payment issue, but no big deal. So it's www.robertwsullivan4.com is where you can find me. I am the author of 5 books. They are all available on all the main online retailers: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can get the print copy or the ebook. My first book was about esoteric Freemasonry. I am a Freemason. I'm a 32nd degree of the Scottish Rite right here in Baltimore, Maryland.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I wrote a book on sort of Masonic philosophy and history and symbolism, really about a historical anomaly. That was my first book, The Royal Arch of Enoch. I have 3 books out on movie symbolism. I'm working on a 4th and 5th right now. And I also have a work of fiction out called A Pact with the Devil. And again, these are all available on all the main online retailers.
Oh, fantastic. And how did you come by? So you're writing all these nonfiction, but what drove you to write the fiction?
Just something new. It was a story that kind of the outline of it came to me in a dream, believe it or not. And I kind of liked it. I thought it was interesting, and I had never really intended to write fiction, but I just started outlining it, and I kind of liked it, and I just continued on with it. And the next thing I knew, I was publishing a work of fiction, and I was pleased with the way it came out.
Fantastic, and I can completely relate to receiving kind of like almost a book through a dream. I've had the same thing. I haven't written the book, but I've had such a detailed, in-depth dream that I wrote it out. It was I write down all my dreams, and this was about 2.5 pages with extreme details, and it's very interesting. Time travel, UFOs,
Sure.
space, and portals and aliens and everything, all the above. So it was very interesting. But I can completely relate with that. So let's just jump right into this. So, well, actually, maybe I should ask though, is how did you get into looking for the symbolism within these movies? How did that come about?
Right. So this started for me at a very early age. I was born in 1971, so I'm dating myself, obviously. And one of the movies, of course, that I grew up on, or the trilogy, was the original Star Wars movies. And it was sort of when I was in high school. This would have been around the mid to late 80s. That I discovered that those movies, the first 3 Star Wars movies, so this would have been A New Hope, Empire, and Jedi, were essentially based on ancient mythology. And that all that Lucas had done is repackaged something that had already existed and just turned it into this gigantic space Western opera, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
So that interested me. And that sort of, growing up as a kid, I was always interested in shows like, In Search Of, always interested in cryptozoology, ghosts, supernatural, things like that. So this was always something that was just a part of me. And certainly with Star Wars and the Joseph Campbell book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, the comparative mythology aspect of it was really what kind of got me interested in this. When I did the Royal Arch of Enoch book, the very last chapter deals with, it's a lot of Masonic history and philosophy, goes back in time. I wanted to bring that book up to speed. I wanted to bring it up to modern day. So in that book, the final chapter was about Masonic, Enochic, solar iconography, symbolism, tropes in popular movies. And some of the movies I covered at the end of the Royal Arch of Enoch book was like the National Treasure films, Da Vinci Code there, Excalibur. And I really just, the 3 movie books were born out of that. I wanted to keep, this was a subject that I wanted to keep talking about. So I did Cinema Symbolism 1, 2, and 3. I'm working on 4 right now, and I'm actually working on Cinema Symbolism Oz, which is going to cover everything with the Wizard of Oz. I've taken that on before. I get into the political allegory and sort of the Gnostic, Kabbalistic allegories of the Wizard of Oz in the first movie book. But there is a whole nother angle of this movie that is quite fascinating and disturbing that I'm analyzing. I'm talking about it in Cinema Symbolism 4, which will be the next book, but I'm really going to expand on it in this book called Cinema Symbolism Oz, which is just going to be solely the Wizard of Oz.
Fantastic. I'm like, okay, so I need to have you back to talk about Enoch, and then I need to have you back here in the future to talk about the symbolism of Oz as well, because those are very interesting topics. And I do know that Oz has a lot of symbolism within it. I've only touched on it. Like, I haven't dived into it, which is great, because if I can have you back, you can talk about it, tell us all about that. Yeah. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is, yeah, I would need way more than an hour. But an hour is all we got. So that's what we're going to do. So, okay, well, let's go into this. Star Wars, that is always a fan favorite. Well, at least it used to be. It's kind of been dying out as of late. But tell us a little bit about that. What is some symbolism that is within Star Wars specifically?
Right. So the whole thing with Star Wars, and this is really the first three movies, is this is just a retelling of this ancient mythology. It's the journey of the sun. It's the solar archetype, the sun hero, with Luke Skywalker being that character. The name Luke Skywalker is a play on the sun. The name Luke comes from the word lux, which is Latin meaning light. And of course, what light walks across the sky every day? The sun. And again, this is, a retelling of just any ancient mythology and even religion, where it's this solar hero goes on a mythical quest, encounters various figures along the way, ultimately on a journey to defeat some dark evil overlord of some kind. I mean, you can even look at it as religion. The Christ story is this paradigm, and you can even see it with Harry Potter. I mean, it's the same story. This character plucked from commonplace to go on to defeat some evil dark overlord. Again, we see it with the Lord of the Rings. With Frodo Baggins. I mean, same story, just rebranded, repackaged, and with a new dark evil overlord, Sauron.
Yeah.
So, and that's an interesting name that they gave him. The name Sauron is a play on the word Saturn, which of course is blackness of death, and what is Sauron but the Lord of the Rings, right? The one ring to rule them all, and what is Saturn? The Lord of the Rings, right? So that was kind of an interesting name to give to him. So yeah, I mean, this was some of the stuff that just interested me, and Star Wars is just a great movie to witness the monomyth in action. There are better ones. The David Lynch Dune movie is fantastic. I mean, that has really all the elements of the monomyth just laid out right in order. More the Lynch one than the two new ones they just did. So again, this was sort of the impetus as to what got me going here. And along the way, I mean, it has taken some strange turns. I really wrote the first three books just analyzing like esoteric themes, whether they be, Gnostic, alchemical, hidden tropes. I mean, certainly some of these would categorize as what you would call Easter eggs. I shy away. I sometimes I put them in, and sometimes I kind of shy away from them. It just depends on the nature of the egg. But some of my takes on this has changed substantially in the last year, just with some new information that I have brought to light. And again, my opinion on some of this is morphing. It's an evolving opinion. So I have expressed, how can I say, opinions and theories on this, but now this is somewhat changing. I mean, it's in flux, as it were.
Fascinating. And speaking of in flux, that will take us to, maybe another great trilogy, the Back to the Future, the Flux Capacitor.
Right.
What have you discovered through that trilogy? Like I've heard a lot of, well, I'll let you lead it, because mine are speculation, but I'd love to hear what you have uncovered.
Right. There's a lot going on in those. They're very interesting movies. From a symbolic standpoint, they wreak havoc with your subconscious mind, because if you really pay attention to them, especially when you get into the sequels, they create a lot of paradoxes. So, for example, in the first movie, if you pay attention to where the person who reads the future is in the town square, that there's the fortune teller. If you go ahead to the future in the second movie, that same space is occupied by blast to the past, which houses all the relics of the past. So in modern day, it sees the future. In the future, it sees the past. So you see these little paradoxes going on all the time in the Back to the Future films.
Yeah.
The first movie is essentially, again, this retelling of this solar monomythic allegory where clearly Marty is a Horus, Egyptian type figure. Doc Brown is obviously the wizard character. This is what you would call the Hermes Trismegistus archetype, the god of magic. This is, of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, Dumbledore in Harry Potter, and this would be Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. That would be their counterparts. You clearly have a heavy Egyptian mythology with this revolving around the sun, where the time machine is what you would call the solar chariot. If you remember, it can't be activated to the 88 miles an hour.
Yeah.
This is a trope that you will see routinely in time travel movies. Is the number 8. If you take the number 8 and turn it on its side, you have something known as the Lemnis Gate, which is a symbol for infinity. You actually see this in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure as well. It's a symbol for time travel, essentially, and this is why the DeLorean has to hit 88 to break the space-time barrier. Yeah, what have you. But what's really interesting is, so you clearly have Marty as a Horus type figure. The mother, Lorraine, is clearly Isis. George would be Osiris, who of course is killed and resurrected, just as Osiris was. And Biff Tannen, the name Tannen is a play on the name Typhon, who is of course his arch enemy. One of the things I liked in this movie that they really kind of veiled very cleverly was, if you remember, when this is in the first one, when he's going back in time to 1985, or he's going forward in time to 1985, the clock tower has to hit 10:04. That's when the lightning's going to strike it and send Marty back to the future. 10:04 is also a date. It's October 4th. And what's interesting about that is that's a solar reference, because on the solar calendar, October 4th means there are 88 days left of the solar calendar. And again, this ties into why the time machine has to hit 88 miles to whisk him back to the future. So that's just a little bit of the Back to the Future trilogy. I like those movies very much. And those were films that I took on in the very first book, actually.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed them, but I never knew it went as deep as you're talking. Like this 10:04. This October 4th. That's fascinating. Like these writers who are writing this, they know more than they're letting on, more or less, is what's coming out. It's kind of like they have this inside knowledge of something much more deeper, much more esoteric than we just sit there and watch and enjoy this film. But we're being giving these messages, and if we're not paying attention, we're missing these messages.
Right. A lot of this is designed to play on your subconscious mind. It whisks past, it goes by your consciousness, and it tinkers around with your subconscious mind. It has to do with something known as the archetypes. And archetypal imagery. And it's complex. It's brought to light by a Swiss psychiatrist named Carl Jung, but it actually predates Jung. It goes way, way back in time to what these guys in the Renaissance were talking about. They didn't have the advent of Jungian psychology, so they were referring to the archetypes as, you'll hear terms thrown around such as shadows of the world's soul, or part of the unus mundi, the one world, shadows from the one world. And the idea is that these archetypes, this archetypal imagery, is implanted in the soul actually as it descends from heaven to earth. And as it descends, it passes through these different, what you would call spheres of spiritual, enlightenment. And a lot of these spheres are governed by planets. Saturn, the sun, the moon, etc. So these archetypes are then embedded in our subconscious mind, and it's the moon, it's the sun, it's Saturn, it's Jupiter. And this gives rise to characters, the solar archetype, Apollo, the god, Jesus Christ in Christianity, the moon, Diana, Saturn, the death figure, the Grim Reaper. These are archetypes. And if you go back in time and you start reading the Renaissance guys, like Giordano Bruno, people like that, they get into these concepts of that if you become in tune to the archetypes, you actually somehow or another, through some osmosis, become closer to the Godhead. And of course, the idea is that these movies, cinema, is toying around with these archetypes, which are embedded in your subconscious mind. And it's like a catnip, as it were. The human soul is hooked on these things. So when you see a movie and you see the archetypes being interacting and being played out in front of you, this is something you have deep knowledge of, only you just don't know it. And that's again why these movies make multi-millions of dollars, because they are presenting archetypal imagery or tropes or themes or characters that appeal very deeply to the subconsciousness.
Wow. That is, I never knew it went so deep into that and playing on our subconscious. Like I knew it was playing on our subconscious, but I never knew to what degree and how it was really, narrowing in and keying into that. So that's really interesting. Now I have a question is, are they writing it like this just to get the views to make the money, or is there another reason as to why this is playing out over and over again? Like you're saying, like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Dune, Back to the Future. Why keep repeating this? And of course it's working. It's working, but is there a why?
It's a great question. It's multifaceted. So of course, one explanation is, there's several. One explanation is that, these writers are very aware of this and they incorporate it. Another explanation, and they walk hand in hand, is, of course, people who make movies are human beings also. So they are being influenced by this, and they may not even know it. They may be making and creating artwork and cinema, and they are under this influence, you employing archetypes and archetypal imagery subconsciously as well. They're unaware of it. That's another thought. My experience with looking at it is, it depends on the filmmaker. Some are more adroit than others, clearly. You can definitely see patterns emerging when you watch movies like by Darren Aronofsky or Ari Aster or Kubrick, where you are clearly dealing with someone who is very in tune with this and they know what they're doing. You watch other movies, such as one of the ones I was talking about, I think the last show I was on. You take a movie like Ed Wood, one of his movies, Glenn or Glenda. And that presents, it's one of the first movies to really present the Gnostic demiurge on film. This is where Bela Lugosi plays sort of the lesser god of the material world. And it's by far and away one of the best examples of it. Clearly, Wood had no knowledge whatsoever of Gnostic doctrines or Gnostic heresy. And yet there in his movie is one of the best examples of the Gnostic demiurge. So again, this could be emerging from Wood's subconsciousness as well. There is also, and this is where I was talking about earlier, one of the also likely explanations that has to be examined and be taken very seriously is the idea that some of this is emerging from the supernatural realm. Somehow or another, there are forces at work, supernatural forces, that are at play in implanting this imagery in films. And when I use the word supernatural, I am narrowing it to mean movies, when movies are prophetic and seem to predict the future. There are instances where I can't really explain it other than, you can get into the whole thing with Plato. And this is one of my earlier theories, is that the idea that creating a movie is artwork, and that by creating artwork, you're somehow tapping into like an ether, or the ether. And it's like it's like Jung's collective unconsciousness working backwards, that because, how can I say, because it is the collective unconscious, since everybody has it and all these archetypes are part of our subconscious mind, can it somehow become a predictive mechanism when you're creating? It's possible. It's a theory of mine. Again, it could be another explanation. My take on, and we were talking about this before the show started, and this has evolved for me in the last year or so. When you're dealing with 9/11, and specifically 9/11, I believe that when you see 9/11 imagery in pop culture or media, and it goes back way, way back, it seems to escalate and become more prominent as the event approached.
Okay.
But you can find 9/11 stuff way, way back, going back to the 1970s, the 1960s. I am now of the opinion that this is some sort of supernatural event of some kind.
Okay.
And that's where I stand right now. So my theory, and I'm limiting that just to the 9/11 material.
Yeah.
I fully believe, without question, that the imagery of 9/11 being predicted in whether it be comic books or movies or TV shows, that this is somehow a supernatural occurrence of some kind that I am still working on trying to provide. I have a good idea of how this is happening. But again, it would take a very long amount of time for me to explain it. But it is related to what we were talking about earlier. It does tie into the Wizard of Oz, of all things.
Interesting. Yeah. And I agree with you with the ether. I believe like the ether is like this large pool that, surpasses time and space, and any large events can imprint upon it. And maybe that is where we're able to grab and pull from, like we're able to pull these ideas, pull these thoughts, these emotional, landmarks of sorts, and that affects us, and it causes us maybe to subconsciously write something in or place something strategically within a movie. That it is, I think there is a lot of subconscious, but I wonder if there is any conscious as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you will clearly see, filmmakers doing things intentionally. I mean, that is without question. They reference. One of the things that films like to do, and this is really one of the subjects of the book I'm writing on right now, is they will include. And it's very well done. They will include tropes and themes relating to other movies without you really knowing it. So they do this a couple of ways. They can do it by casting certain actors and actresses to actually sort of bring their cinematic baggage from earlier movies. It's more than typecasting. It's more of a subconscious reference, where by putting a certain actress and actor in a scene, they will bring sort of, it's called, the best word I could use to describe it is like a cultural valence of some kind. They're creating some sort of new energy by transferring energy or baggage from an earlier movie into the newer one. Another thing that they do is, and then the really adroit filmmakers will do this, is they will cite other movies. So like, I'll give you an example on this. If you take, I'll give you a couple. If you take a look at Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, which is a ode to repetition, and that's another memory trick, is repeating things over and over, but you have to do it in a way that the audience doesn't know it. So if you really watch The Shining by Kubrick, he repeats everything over and over again. The whole movie is just nothing but one thing repeating after another. And he gets that from a movie that came out a few years earlier in the earlier 70s called Don't Look Now, with Donald Sutherland, who just passed away. And that is sort of like the king granddaddy of repetition when it comes to subtly burying it in film and cinema. And when you watch Don't Look Now, one of the things that kind of jumps off the screen is the opening credits are in periwinkle blue. And when you watch The Shining, they are also in periwinkle blue. And that credit by Kubrick is actually citing two movies. It's citing Don't Look Now, which I just explained, because Kubrick became obsessed with repetition, and he really goes overboard with it in The Shining. But then Kubrick If you watch his films and you're a fan of his, you will pick up quickly that so many of the pivotal scenes in his films take place in bathrooms. It's pretty much cut across the board that in all of Kubrick's films, there will always be a critical scene in a bathroom. And that ties into the movie Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock, because Psycho was the first film to feature a flushing toilet. And of course, this would be something that Kubrick was very much into. So the question then becomes, well, how do we draw a parallel between Periwinkle Blue and Psycho? Because this was clearly a movie that influenced Kubrick, influenced his whole movie career, essentially. And if you remember in Psycho, Mrs. Bates was buried in a periwinkle blue dress. So when you watch the opening credits of The Shining, those periwinkle blue credits are alluding to two films, Don't Look Now and Psycho. And again, it ties into the toilet and repetition, which Kubrick was obsessed with. So that's very conscious. I mean, that is Kubrick definitely using that to draw a parallel, to be picked up on by somebody who is very well versed in cinema. And it's a game they like to play. It's a game of chess almost. Can you figure me out? Can you find out all my hidden meanings in this? It's like a Da Vinci painting. The real the real experts will hide these little clues and subtle nuances in their films, and it's a game of chess. Go find them, and it's also it's a hallmark of an expert craftsman. The directors who do this, I mean, their movies are masterpieces most of the time. I mean, they're very memorable movies. This is part of the reason why employing these esoteric techniques, I mean, really does transform the movie into mythology. Another movie that's more recent was the Ghostbusters, not the one that just came out, although that one does a little bit, but Afterlife.
Yeah.
So if you watch Afterlife, I mean that whole movie is an allusion to the Wizard of Oz again, where you have the girl. This would be Phoebe, goes from the city to the rural landscape, so it's a change of scenery. She wears the red shoes, of course, conjuring the ruby slippers. And once she gets to the strange land where she's completely a fish out of water, she meets the three companions. This would be Podcast, Mr. Gruberson, and I forget the other girl's name, Lucky. And then again, they have this adventure and defeat a dark, evil overlord, an Ozian type character, or a wicked witch, as it were, which would be Gozer. Very interesting themes in this movie, and these go back to the first one from 1984. So Gozer, if you recall, is androgynous.
Yeah.
It has no sex. It is basically a combination, and this comes out of alchemy. In order to Gozer to manifest, there has to be something called coincidentia oppositorum to occur. This is the union of the male and the female, which of course are the two demon dogs, Vince Clortho and Zool. So you'll always notice that Gozer, because it's androgynous, can never manifest until Zool and Vince Clortho hook up. The union of opposites, the union of the sun and moon, male and female. So again, these are very clever tropes that these filmmakers use. One of the things also I liked in Ghostbusters Afterlife that they did is, you remember the mine tower, where it was the mountain, but it was more like a small tower. If you watch it as the movie progressed, you saw the lights buzzing around, that this was the ghosts coming alive. That is intentionally designed to conjure Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where you had the Devil's Tower being circled by all the UFOs. Again, it's a memory trick. It's drawing a parallel to your subconscious mind. By doing that, if you remember in Close Encounters, it was Devil's Tower. So by doing that, what the filmmakers are doing is making Gozer demonic by transferring the energies of the Devil's Tower in Close Encounters to Ghostbusters Afterlife. Very, very clever.
Wow. that is a lot to unpack, and just it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've written three books about it, and do we drop off?
Amazing, I've never dived too much deep into Ghostbusters. Oh, there we are. Yeah, that's my connection. We'll just give it a minute. Oh, one of my programs decided that it was a great time to update during the podcast here, so I'll have to edit that out there. But no, so as I was saying, is that yeah, Ghostbusters. I've never went too deep into Ghostbusters. I've just thoroughly enjoyed the movies, but there seems to be a lot more there than what really meets the eye. When you're talking about this, it's quite fascinating. Now, I know we kind of touched on 9/11. What can we go into some symbolisms throughout the movies that are referencing this 9/11? That have been put into the movies. You said even back in the 70s.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of 9/11 references, and I am of the opinion now, and again, it's a long story, but I believe that these citations to 9/11 are supernatural. So, the one thing that you will see is clearly there is a lead up to this as it gets closer. So you look at a movie like The Matrix, where Neo's passport expires on 9/11/01. You look at a movie like Fight Club, where you have the destruction of the financial towers at the end of it, and of course Tyler Durden refers to it as Ground Zero. One was really interesting. I'd have to go pull this up. Hang on, let me pull this up real fast. I just want to make sure. Yeah, let me just open a Word document here. Give me a minute, because I just want to get this right. Because just give me a minute. I'm actually opening the book right now. So let me just do a quick word search. So you wanted me to go back in time a little bit. So let me do this. So this one was interesting. We'll get out of the movies real quick.
Yeah.
So the Atari 2600 video gaming console, remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that was released in the United States on September 11th, 1997. And the system included the game Combat, which means jihad in Arabic. And it was a 2-player game, and you were trying to destroy each other. And again, one of the, with each other. Right. And of course, it was battles you were having. And the word Atari, believe it or not, actually means to strike the target. So I thought that was really interesting. So you have Atari 2600, you have the word strike the target with the word jihad right off the bat, released on September 11th, 1977. So that's kind of a strange one.
And what's interesting is, the numerical value of 2600, of course, goes down to 8, which is when you're talking a bit about like your time travel kind of thing as well.
Yeah.
So there is a little interesting.
There's so many of these. I mean, in the movie Godzilla 1998, I think there was a camera recording that was 9/11 that stood out. One of the ones that was interesting that you wanted to go back in time with was in the James Bond movie. No, it wasn't Dr. No, it was Thunderball, where it was Thunderball and the one after it. It was Thunderball and You Only Live Twice. And this is where Blofeld, first he electrocutes number 11 for embezzlement. And if you remember it, he kills number 11, and the chair that he's sitting in disappears. And then in 11 is sitting next to number 9, and then in the next movie he kills number 9. So you had 9/11 right there. So yeah, the Back to the Future, the 9/11 stuff goes way back, but it does seem to escalate. As it moves forward, as you get closer to the event, and of course there's the Simpsons episode, which everyone knows about.
Yes, of course.
Then there's the Lone Gunman episode, which everyone knows about.
Yeah.
There is, like I said, when in my opinion, when you're dealing with the 9/11 imagery, I now excise that out, and I believe that this is a supernatural event that ties into, believe it or not, the Wizard of Oz, Aleister Crowley, and something known as the Procession of the Equinoxes. Very interesting.
Okay, I feel like that could be just like you said, that could be a whole show onto itself, just that onto itself.
Yes, very, 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 very complicated. The one thing that is outstanding, if you look at 9/11 and you go forward or backwards, and it really starts in 1939, we will do not have time to unfortunately get into all this, but I can give you a hint that when you go back in time and you look at tragedies, there are a sequence of numbers that always surround these events, and they come out of the world of Aleister Crowley, and they are designating the end of the old age and the start of the new age. And you will see these numbers routinely pop up. And in some cases, just blanket the event. And then Crowley, in one of his books, gives a whole system of gematria where numbers have different meanings and what they mean and things like that. And if you start looking at people, you will see these numbers turn up around them. It's really quite astounding. I've never ever seen anything like this before in my life. Just because, and what makes it so utterly bizarre is it's very easy to prove because the numbers do it for you. You will just see these numbers routinely blanket these events. Some of the numbers are the number 77, the number 42, the number 333. You will see other Crowleyan numbers such as 81. That is his number for the moon. That number routinely turns up around Princess Diana. Of course, she's named after the lunar goddess Diana. So of course we see that number around her. It's quite remarkable, to say the least.
Wow. Okay. Definitely. I would love to talk more about that, but of course we came here to talk about movies, but it's so fascinating. Like I always say, my interviews always have legs, they just walk off in different directions, and I don't mind that at all. Now let's bring it back to 9/11 with, for those who don't know about Back to the Future, the tie-ins with 9/11 and Back to the Future. If you could, let us know a little bit about that.
Yeah, there are some in there. I will be brutally honest with you. Yeah. Of all the movies, that one at least impresses me the most.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I just, anytime you have to turn stuff upside down and this, that, and the other, that just, I do talk about it. I do put it in the book for thoroughness, but that's one that just never has stood out to me. Anytime you have to kind of turn stuff upside down, I do mention it to be thorough. Yeah, but that one has never really impressed me that much. But it is in there.
Okay, no problem. And I stand corrected. And I'm always open to hearing other people. This is your specialty. I am open to this. So I never actually noticed Neo's passport being expiring on 9/11. So that's fascinating too. And of course, the Matrix itself, that movie itself is just full of so many
Right. So you may have cut out there, but the first Matrix movie is really the Gnostic heresy. It is the Valentinian thread of Gnosticism. I don't know if you are still there or not.
Yes, I am. Sorry,
Okay.
My mic seems to have disconnected. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties today, but that is what it is.
That's okay. No, that's all right. The first Matrix, I do the whole Matrix trilogy. So let's see here. That was in the first book. And the very first Matrix movie, that is the Gnostic religion or heresy on cinema. That is one of the best movies for it. At the turn of the millennium, there was, and I don't know if this was conscious or subconscious, I think it was subconscious, Hollywood released a slate of Gnostic movies. And they are just really cramped into that time frame of about 1995 to about 2002, where Hollywood just put out one Gnostic movie after another. The Matrix is probably the high watermark of them. But I'm talking about stuff like In the Mouth of Madness, John Carpenter, The Truman Show, Fight Club, Donnie Darko, Existenz, Dark City. There's a couple others that are eluding me right now, but there was this rash of Gnostic films put out at the turn of the millennium, and I think it had something to do with the turn of the millennium. But again, what makes it interesting is it's in so many of these Gnostic films that we have the 9/11 references. Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise, that's another one. we do have in these films these 9/11 citations. There's a lot of them, not all of them, but in that batch of films, that is where you will find a substantial amount of 9/11 imagery. And again, my opinion, as I sit here talking to you today, has changed over the last year, where I am now of the belief that this is a supernatural occurrence. Yeah.
What did you believe prior to that? What was your, or what was your thought process prior to that being before being supernatural? And I concur with you on it being supernatural. Like, I believe, like, when you're talking about something about the ether, being fed this information subconsciously, I think that's something that is very
right.
possible.
Right. I mean, it's my opinion before was a couple things. Is it could it be intentional? Could the filmmakers have knowledge of for events through some government agency, or the government's going to do something? I mean, the nexus between the CIA, the FBI, and Hollywood is well known. I mean, it even goes back to, you can even predate it before the creation of those agencies. I mean, during World War II, Hollywood was routinely employed by the government to create, propaganda, pro-ally movies. I mean, you can see it. I mean, you go look at the first couple Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce, Sherlock Holmes movies. I mean, those are all pure Allied propaganda. So the nexus between government and Hollywood is well established. So it could be that. It could be, like we were talking about earlier, an idea of consciousness, of the collective unconsciousness working in reverse, where by creating a film, you are somehow tapping into the ether and somehow placing, encoding into events into your film with you not even, or the creator not even being aware of it. That's certainly possible. So that, I mean, let me say this. I mean, there are other films that predict other things outside of 9/11 that I definitely think fall into those types of categories. I mean, so for example, 3 Mile Island, right before 3 Mile Island, the China Syndrome was released like 2 weeks beforehand. I mean, that's just uncanny. But when I'm looking at the 9/11 stuff, I have to cut that out because there is a supernatural, what's the word I'm looking for? This is a supernatural event, was 9/11. And Aleister Crowley talks about it. He calls it the supreme ritual in his work. And this, if you go back in time, and you look at tragedies, whether it be Columbine or Sandy Hook or JFK assassination, or Princess Diana, there is routinely the same string of numbers popping up around them. And it is the most astounding thing I've ever seen. I can't explain it, other than to say this is not human made. There is no way possible for human beings, I don't care who they are, to encode numbers over a 70, 80-year time span with the accuracy and thoroughness that these numbers turn up at these events. It is impossible. Impossible.
So there might theoretically be a way to actually predict some of these events through these numbers, then through using these numbers.
That is so fascinating, and I cannot believe you just brought that up, because that's not what I'm trying to do. I am trying to, one of the ways this thing moves around is it revolves around a sequence of numbers. And one of the things is the time between these events. You will routinely see these Crowleyan numbers: 77 weeks, 77 years, 42 days. Can you now sort of predict out some of these events? I've tried, and I have not been successful, because the problem with it is, and what makes it so utterly difficult is, you don't know it, just that. You don't know what number specifically you're dealing with, and you don't know if it's a day, a week, a month, or a year. And that's where this becomes so tricky, to try to predict this out. But once it happens and it kind of lays the groundwork, I mean, then you can spot it a mile away.
Then you can backtrack and go back and see, oh, these are them. Like I wonder if you could actually go through a calendar of sorts, or create an algorithm or have AI go through and it just spew out these dates. These are the possible dates of some sort of event happening.
Well, the dates matter because you can reduce the date to gematria to a number, and a lot of these numbers will reduce. The dates will reduce to like 93, which is a Crowleyan number, or 77, or 42, or 81, or something like that. It's quite remarkable. It has to do again with Crowley. It has to do with the precession of the equinoxes. I believe there's also a death curse involved that was outside of Crowley, that was generated by Native Americans. And the reason why this is so interesting is in all these tragedies, and this is without exception, and this is the thing that makes it the most macabre thing to look at, is in all these tragedies, there will always be hidden in there this little Wizard of Oz reference. And it has to do with Crowley's gematria, because a lot of his key numbers add up to the Wizard of Oz. And this is what makes it so utterly macabre and bizarre to look at, whether it be 9/11 or Columbine or Princess Diana. There will always be a little Wizard of Oz nuanced reference in there in these tragedies. And it's like laughing at you when you see it. And that's what makes this thing the most remarkable thing I have ever seen in my entire life.
Wow. This is accumulating to something much, much bigger. This is really interesting. Yeah.
There is no way human beings could do something like this. I mean, it is just not possible. I mean, and you can go back. I mean, you can go back. I mean, I'll just give you a couple examples just right off the top. Like, I mean, if you look at the Kennedy assassination, right, of JFK. I mean, who kills Kennedy allegedly? I mean, it's Lee Harvey Oswald, and who kills him? The Ruby Slippers, right? Jack Ruby. If you look at Princess Diana, I mean, what was the song Elton John did for her? Goodbye English Rose, which was a play on the remake of the Candle in the Wind song. Right. And what album was Candle in the Wind off of? Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. I mean, it's Wizard of Oz again. So you will always find in these deaths and tragedies these little Wizard of Oz references. And it actually, believe it or not, it actually ties into Crowley. And if you study his gematria for this new age that he talked about, which we are clearly in, these numbers add up to the Wizard of Oz of all things. And it's because of that you will always find these little Wizard of Oz nuance reference in all these bloodbaths going back. It will always be there. It will always be there.
Jeez, that is fascinating, super fascinating. And when you mentioned a native death curse, something that came to mind for me would be Point Pleasant with the Point Pleasant bridge collapse with Mothman. There's a theory about that ties in with Chief Cornwall, I believe it is, or I know I'm not getting that right, but I think there might be something to look into as well.
The reason there had to be a death curse or a killing curse is because these numbers kill, and because of the Wizard of Oz citation. If you read Crowley, there is no reference to the Wizard of Oz anywhere in his books, or anywhere by a book, either by him or a book about him. So there's no evidence Crowley even knew what the Wizard of Oz was. If it was just the numbers, I would stay with Crowley. I would say that this is Crowley's prophecy coming true that was given to him by Aiwass in 1904.
Yeah.
The Wizard of Oz citation throws it into another realm. And that leads me to believe that there was a Native American death hex put down on L. Frank Baum. And the reason I say that is because Baum, of course, wrote the Wizard of Oz stories. And I believe right after the Battle of Wounded Knee, he actually called for the genocide of Native Americans. So now I have motive here. I believe that they put a curse on Baum and his family, a Native American skinwalker or something like that.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, and this I do not have an answer for you with, for whatever reason, this curse did not go after Baum. I think it was intended to, but it didn't for some reason. Instead, it latched itself onto his books. and it does not become kinetic until The Wizard of Oz is being made in 1939. It is only then and after then that you will start to see death start to surface, and these tragedies start manifesting using these Crowleyan numbers, which are also The Wizard of Oz. And there's a whole backstory to this thing. Again, we won't have time to get into it.
No.
It has to do with this new solar age that Crowley prophesies, which is the age of Aquarius.
Yeah.
And Crowley designates certain things and gods that will happen, and things that will come and things that will go. And he gives you numeric designators for this stuff. And these numeric designators are what is killing people. Because if you look at 9/11 or Kennedy or Columbine or Sandy Hook or the Murrah building, you will see these same sequence and numbers all over the place. I mean, they stand out like a sore thumb. If that's all it was, I would say, okay, it's Crowley. But when you throw in these little Wizard of Oz nuances in there, these little clues, these little Wizard of Oz Easter eggs that will always be there, that's when this kicks it up to this realm of there has to be some sort of death curse operating here. Because if it was only Crowley, you shouldn't be seeing the Wizard of Oz citations.
Yeah.
Because there's Wizard of Oz citations, that's bringing Baum and his books into the mix. And that leads me to believe that this is a kill curse of some kind that is both killing and designating this new age of Crowley. It's doing it simultaneously.
Wow. That is I'm excited to, I know I shouldn't be saying I'm excited, but I'm excited to read your book that you're working on, Oz. That one.
This will be in Cinema Symbolism 4 also.
Okay.
4 is the book I'm working on right now. This will have a lot to do with that. But this will also be in Cinema Symbolism Oz. What has happened is, since I wrote all this material in Cinema Symbolism 4, I've discovered new things that this curse is behind. And I can't, it's just too cumbersome to go back and put it in.
Yeah.
So I've determined I'm just going to put it in the new book, but they unfold as they happen. I mean, the one, I'm here in Baltimore, and we just had the collapse of the Baltimore Francis Scott Key Bridge.
Yeah.
This is the same numeric numbers behind this as well. I mean, same ones that you will find on 9/11 and on Columbine and on the Kennedy assassination and Watergate. With the Baltimore Bridge collapse of the Key Bridge, you will find those same numbers again turning up ad nauseum.
Now, just a thought, do you believe that maybe some nefarious people know these dates and are performing some of these or allowing some of these things to happen on these specific dates, maybe to activate something or to do something?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's yes and no. I think there could be human agencies that are sort of
like allowing this ritual or performing a ritual or sort of.
No, it's unintentional. It would be a form. It would be a form of like animal magnetism, that they are under some sort of supernatural force that they're not even aware of. So, like the Kennedy assassination would be a great example of this. Clearly, there was probably a conspiracy involving the CIA. But if you even read some of the more modern conspiracy theories on this, they'll say that there's some unknown dark force at work here that takes this up a level. And I believe that this curse is that unknown, dark force. So I do believe there are human agencies involved, but I think they are more of like pawns in all of this. There is just no way possible human beings could predict all this out and utilize these numbers. I mean, so for example, I mean, if the CIA wanted you dead, they're just going to kill you. They're not going to wait 77 months to do it.
True.
So I would say that this is more of a supernatural event that is utilizing human agencies and using them unknowingly. They believe they are doing something, but there's a darker force behind them guiding them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Really, really fascinating. I know we're coming to an end here of our interview, but there was one movie you brought up earlier that I think is completely underrated and not many people actually listen or have seen it, which is Dark City. I That movie, there is so much in that movie to unpack, and very, very fascinating. If can you just dabble a little bit onto Dark City before we call it a night?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, Dark City is one of those Gnostic films. It probably would go down as one of the greatest Gnostic movies of all time if it wasn't dethroned the following year by The Matrix, because The Matrix and Dark City are all but the same movie, where clearly you have humankind in a form of stasis. The strangers are clearly the archons. In The Matrix, these would be the agents led by Smith. And you have the Gnostic Christ, you have the Gnostic Savior figure. Of course, this is John Murdoch in Dark City, and this is, of course, Neo in The Matrix. The Gnostic Christ is a little more different than the Orthodox one. In Orthodox Christianity, Christ is essentially the redeemer of sin. That's a little different than the Gnostic take on Christ. In the Gnostic heresy, Christ is the wrecker of worlds. He is the guy who has been sent into this world to destroy the artifice of the demiurge, the false reality. I mean, you will even see hints of this in the Orthodox version of Christ, the story when Christ goes into the second temple and starts destroying it, basically saying, you guys are pawns of the demiurge. This is all worthless. Just get rid of it. And again, this is sort of echoes the Gnostic Christ, Murdoch and Neo, who have come in to destroy the phony artifice of the demiurge and his henchmen, the archons. So yeah, those are two great films. I mean, Dark City is fantastic. I love that movie. And I love The Matrix also. Those are two really great movies if you want to see, excuse me, the Gnostic heresy on cinema, in film, especially the Valentinian thread. Go watch Dark City or go watch The Matrix. They got everything you're looking for.
They do. Well, Robert, I want to say thank you so much for coming in and leaving us with some amazing information. This it's blowing my mind. I've only scratched the surface, but you've gone deep into this, and I appreciate that. So why don't you tell our listeners and viewers one last time where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rye, for having me on Codex of Curiosities. It was my pleasure to be here with you tonight. So yeah, I mean, my website is my name. My name is Robert W. Sullivan IV. My website is Robert W. Sullivan IV. Oh, excuse me, that's the old one. RobertWSullivan4.com. www.robertwsullivan4.com. There are links there to purchase the books. This interview, this podcast will be stationed there. I will put it there once it gets released on YouTube. And there's information about me. It's constantly being updated. Check the blog for updates, radio shows. I sometimes put out teaser information. Again, robertwsullivan4.com. There are links there to purchase the books. All my books are available on all the main online retailers: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, print edition, or the ebook, whatever you choose. Again, www.robertwsullivan4.com. And again, thank you, Rye, for having me on your show. It was my pleasure to be here. And when the next book comes out, we'll do this all over again, and we will 100%. Definitely delve into the Wizard of Oz.
I am looking forward to it, and we're gonna hit Enoch as well.
Oh yes, of course.
Enochian, yes, looking really interesting. Thank you so much, Robert. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you again for having me on. It was my pleasure.
All right, guys, that was Robert Sullivan the Fourth, and super fascinating, super interesting. He has a lot to say. He's done a lot of research, a lot of diving deep into these realms here, and super fascinating. Really interesting. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. Now, now that we're getting winding down, we're getting close to the end here. Is there anybody that you would like to see on my show? I want you to send me some messages. Like, even if you don't have any, I'm always looking for people who've had experiences to come on to my show, but perhaps you want to hear someone special and you're like, hey, I heard this one person before. Can you track him down? Or, hey, my best friend, he's had some experiences. Can he be on your show? By all means, tell them to send me an email at codexofcuriosities@gmail.com, or find me on Facebook, or even send me a message in the YouTube comment. I'm always game for that. I answer every single one. So with that, the dogs, it's time for the dogs to start barking, which means keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always, always find your way home. I look forward to our next adventure together as we navigate the mysteries that lie ahead. Until our paths cross again, keep your curiosity wandering and ensure the light remains lit.